Guys, we did it. We survived 3 weeks of travel through Japan and South Korea. In what was probably the craziest, most surreal trip I've ever been on for Coaster Dash, I rode 119 new Asian roller coasters. More than 100 of those can be found in the land of the rising sun, and so what I wanted to do today was reveal my top 25 favorites across Japan specifically. And soon I'll also be doing a similar ranking for Korean coasters, though I only obtained 17 credits there, so admittedly it won't be as exciting of a list. But I have to say, I'm very proud of what we accomplished in Japan, visiting more than 20 parks with a roller coaster, from the north of the country in Hokkaido to the south in Kyushu, and literally just about everything in between. If you're looking for a complete list, I have a playlist of vlogs from the 2025 Asia tour, and each of those theme parks are represented over there. Additionally, we were fortunate that we didn't have to deal with too many ride closures, which is something I hear can be a nightmare in Japan. We ended up only taking 2 L's, but having said that, I think both of those coasters would have ranked fairly high on the list, so I wanted to give them an honorable mention before we dive in. Thunder Dolphin at Tokyo Dome City is a monster of a ride located smack dab in the city center of Tokyo. Seeing as it's the second tallest and second fastest roller coaster in the country, it was no doubt a shame to have missed out on it, but I am doubtful it could have ranked in the top 10 as it appears to have a short, kind of meandery layout. From what I've heard, the pacing on this coaster is really odd, as it'll be speeding through dips and bunny hills 1 second and crawling atop buildings the next. I would be wrong to deny how unique and unconventional it is though. Also near Tokyo is a small park called Tobu Zoo, which only has a few roller coasters, and one of those was scheduled for regular summer maintenance, which is common here seeing as Japan doesn't exactly have a peak tourism season like we do in the United States. Regina 2 is a huge Intamin wooden coaster, one of 3 in Japan, and the only one we unfortunately missed. A few years back, it was given a major overhaul by Great Coasters International, in which it received new trains, theming, and a lot of track work. So that, combined with how long of a layout it's got, I do suspect I would have loved this ride, but it, along with Thunder Dolphin, do give me a reason to return to Japan, in particular Tokyo, at some point. One more thing before we get started is trips like this would not be possible without our friends on Patreon. I'm not going to sit here and do what other YouTubers do, guilt tripping you by claiming a membership costs a low price of just $5 a month. No, I can acknowledge that it's a big ask for a small channel like mine. But if you feel so inclined, the absolute best way to support what I do would be to hit the link in the description or pinned comment, subscribing to the Coaster Dash Patreon, and in turn you will be entitled to early uploads, our theme park focused podcast, exclusive Q&A videos, and the list goes on. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and enjoy my ranking of the top 25 roller coasters I rode in Japan. Number 25, Mega Coaster at Hamanako Pal Pal in Hamamatsu. This is the first of many Togos that'll feature on my list, a rides manufacturer that doesn't have the best reputation where I'm from, but here in their home base of Japan, it's an entirely different story. This is a short but satisfying layout that focuses on hang time and positive G-force. It's surprisingly an intense coaster that sadly is not the most comfortable. Mega Coaster has these accordion over-the-shoulder restraints that are obnoxious and will result in some neck banging. If you're familiar with the Big Apple coaster in Las Vegas, Nevada, that's a very similar, much more accessible Togo coaster for a lot of my American viewers. Personally, I've never despised that ride like so many others do, but even I think Mega Coaster is an improved version in most every way. Number 24, Elf at Hirakata Park outside of Osaka. One of 3 wooden roller coasters currently in Japan, Elf, which hilariously is an abbreviation for Episode of Little Fairies, yeah, don't ask, is an overlooked ride for its size. You wouldn't expect a 60-foot tall, 35-mile-per-hour family coaster to have much in the way of airtime, but at least where we sat in the front row, this thing tossed us around on repeat. And virtually all of these were not graceful floater hills, they were violent ejector pops. It was crazy. But with that being said, it is pretty rough for a wooden coaster, and its turnarounds are mostly filler as they serve to get you from one hill to the next. Number 23, Loop the Loop at Rasutsu Resort outside of Sapporo. I've experienced many compact shuttle coasters from Schwarzkopf, Aerodynamics, the list goes on, but none have the intensity of this one-of-a-kind variant from Japanese manufacturer Meisho. It's also different than most in that it starts with a backwards pass and then sends you in the forwards direction where you can better grasp what's going on. What carries this ride though is that iconic Meisho loop, which due to its perfectly circular shape is one of the best ever built in the world. Number 22, Milky Way at Greenland outside of Kumamoto. This peculiar Togo dueling coaster has one track that runs with a sit-down train and one that runs with a stand-up train. We started with the former and were thoroughly impressed by the ride's pacing and interactivity with the other side, but then we rode it standing. Earlier in the trip, we'd been blown away by another Togo stand-up, which you'll see later on in the list, and while this one wasn't quite as good as that was, I still easily preferred it to the sit-down side. Other than a slightly inferior ending, I found the blue track to deliver much more violent airtime and crazier positive G-force. Plus, where else can you even ride a dueling stand-up coaster? As far as I'm concerned, this is the only one out there. Number 21, Venus GP at Himeji Central Park in Himeji. Within this park's underrated collection of coasters, Venus GP was absolutely my most anticipated. Not the one I necessarily expected to be the best, but easily what I was most looking forward to. And in most ways, it did deliver for me with its outstanding pacing through the entire layout and almost absurd positive G-force. But where the ride suffers is in its vehicles being absolutely atrocious. Not only are these trains tight and claustrophobic, but they have similar over-the-shoulder restraints to that of Mega Coaster, and it takes away greatly from the experience. If they found a way to invest in a more comfortable replacement train, this would shoot up the list by at least a few spots for me, if not even higher. Number 20, Hollywood Dream the ride at Universal Studios Japan in Osaka. Now let me preface this by saying I did not experience this coaster in the backwards direction. It normally runs with 3 trains, 2 of those face forwards and 1 is backwards, and you can wait in a separate queue line to try out the latter. Unfortunately, due to a limited amount of time in the park, I only got 1 ride on Hollywood Dream, and while I draw issue with the small stature of the coaster relative to other hypercoasters from B&M, I did still have a great time with it. Despite the POV on screen here, it is a remarkably smooth ride and has a good deal of airtime. I also love the turnaround section, which consists of a tight double helix that pulls some great positives. On top of that, it's one of those rare coasters that flawlessly executes onboard audio, so it just feels like a party, and that is a blast. Number 19, Ultra Twister at Nagashima Spaland outside of Nagoya, and Brazilian Park Washuzen Highland outside of Okayama. I could not wait to try an Ultra Twister for the first time since they can only be found in Japan, and even so, only 3 remain in the entire country. Well, I was fortunate enough to get all of them under my belt, and these first 2 represent the standard layout. It consists of a drop, camelback, and inversion, followed by a tilt track that sends you flying backwards through an additional set of heartline rolls. The reason this is able to work is because of the vehicles, which are the heart and soul to what is referred to as a pipeline coaster. Essentially, instead of riding above or below the track like most roller coasters, you are riding within the track, which is super cool, but as a consequence, the trains aren't capable of making any turns. This explains the linear layout and use of a tilt track. These Ultra Twisters are incredibly unique contraptions and actually have great forces too, airtime and hang time throughout. Number 18, Diavolo at Himeji Central Park in Himeji. If you visited a Six Flags park in the States, chances are you've ridden a Batman the Ride clone. This is a compact B&M inverted coaster, actually the prototype for this style of ride where you're sitting below the track and are capable of flipping upside down. That was something that hadn't been attempted before Batman's debut in 1992 at Six Flags Great America, and it caught on big time with tons of iterations at the Six Flags parks and even a few outside of the chain like Diavolo all the way out in Japan. This packs in the same ridiculous intensity and pacing of the others, but also stands out amongst Batman clones for a variety of reasons. 1, it seems to run even better than the average, something to do with the wheels they use or the humidity of Japan, I'm not sure. And 2, the surrounding vegetation and terrain interaction make the ride feel more alive, the former because of some added near-miss elements, and the latter because it allows Diavolo to feel taller than it actually is. Just a kick-ass attraction all around, and it's great that it's here since it gives folks in Asia an opportunity to experience one of these layouts. Number 17, Go On at Hokkaido Greenland outside of Sapporo. When you think of a basic, standard roller coaster, what comes to mind? Because for me, it's a classic mine train coaster which became incredibly popular in the United States starting in the 60s. Here in Japan, the equivalent is what we call a jet coaster, which literally means roller coaster to them, so that kind of proves my point, doesn't it? Most Japanese jet coasters are fun, but nothing overly special, since they tend to have shallow dips and hills that don't do much of anything. But for whatever reason, Go On was the exception to say the least. The layout is filled to the brim with excellent bursts of airtime, and some way somehow, despite how neglected the park felt, it was also super smooth. I just had an absolute blast with Go On. It was easily one of my favorite coasters on the trip to Marathon. Number 16, Acrobat at Nagashima Spaland outside of Nagoya. I've always been a sucker for a good flying coaster, where you lay in a prone position and fly high above the ground like you're Superman. One of the better layouts B&M built from this model line would have to be Manta at SeaWorld Orlando in Florida, a ride that I'm sure many of you have ridden. Well, it turned out to be so well received that a park on the other side of the planet decided to clone it 6 years after the original's debut. And I really can't blame them because only weirdos like me will get on both. To the people out here, this may as well be an original coaster. Though it lacks the theming and landscaping that positively contribute to Manta's ride experience, in all other ways it is just as good. I love the pretzel loop that sends you face first diving towards the ground and the conversions that take place way above the pathways. It's a smooth, mostly graceful ride, and it makes sense it's one of the most popular attractions at both Nagashima Spaland and SeaWorld Orlando. Number 15, Jupiter at Kijima Kogen outside of Oita. Japan's largest wooden roller coaster and one of the biggest built in general, Jupiter was high on my bucket list ahead of the 2025 Asia tour. I knew it was going to be tall, fast, and extremely long, but at the end of the day, it's all about the elements and the forces. So, did Jupiter deliver? In most ways, yes. There's no hill that fails to provide airtime, even if some aren't anything more than an elegant floater, and none of the mostly unbanked curves fail to provide laterals. It's actually a strong suit of this coaster, in my opinion. But above all else, Jupiter feels like a never-ending expedition, a lot like the Beast at Kings Island, or closer to Japan, T-Express at Everland. One of those rides that feels like it's going on forever, and more than originally expected, that really improved my opinion of the attraction. Number 14, Zocon at Fuji-Q Highland outside of Kofu. If you're familiar with this rather new family coaster, you're probably wondering how it made it so far on this list. It's nowhere near the size of, and doesn't pull the forces many of the rides I ranked lower do. Yet despite that, Zocon was a joy from start to finish, and that's saying a lot since this is one long ride. I liken it to Hagrid's Magical Creatures motorbike adventure at Universal Orlando if you stripped it away of its theming. Not that Zocon was plopped down on a parking lot, it still looks nice and is stylized well, but if you know how much fun Hagrid's elements are, that should hopefully be a testament to how great Zocon is as well. It's got exciting onboard audio, a show scene in the middle of the layout, and at large, said layout is really quite dynamic. Something like 4 launches, a spike and corresponding backwards section, all of it is just so enjoyable and only accentuated by the motorbike seating that makes the ride feel so much more intimate. Number 13, Steel Dragon 2000 at Nagashima Spaland outside of Nagoya. This was the last Giga Coaster I needed to ride anywhere around the world, which is a roller coaster with a height somewhere in between 300 and 399 feet. Naturally, with stats like that, and with it being the highest coaster in all of Japan, there's an expectation that the ride is going to be incredibly exhilarating. And to an extent it was. I had a lot of fun with Steel Dragon 2000, but as a coaster nerd, I have to admit it is far inferior to every other Giga Coaster, and I think it's because the layout feels so much more hyper-like. Look at Hollywood Dream, for example, the way it's mostly just big camelback after big camelback, that's all Steel Dragon is. To me, a coaster with this much potential energy that reaches a staggering 95 miles per hour should take advantage of that speed by remaining low to the ground for much of the layout. Steel Dragon really isn't that way though. To make up for that, it does have over 8,000 feet of track and is the former record holder for longest roller coaster in the world. So it's a lot like Jupiter in that it feels like a journey or a voyage, something like that. Overall an excellent ride, but I wouldn't say it blew me away like the other Giga Coasters out there. Number 12, Ultra Twister at Risutsu Resort outside of Sapporo. Of the many Ultra Twisters that have been built, only one's ever had a custom original layout, and it was the reason I wanted to go so far out of the way to include Hokkaido on the 2025 Asia Tour. Admittedly, it would have been worth it regardless of Ultra Twister, with rides like Loop the Loop and Go On also making my top 25, but man, this thing was something truly special. It starts more or less the same as its sister rides, though its restraints are much less restrictive, which is the cause for heightened airtime and hang time opportunity. And then, rather than a turntable, you've got a dive loop as the turnaround mechanism, so there is no break in the pacing. Up to this point, Ultra Twister had been a great ride, but it's the finale that elevated it so far up my list. These two back-to-back Heartland rolls are taken at such a fast speed that it feels like you're in a washing machine. I haven't been this appalled by an inversion since I first rode Velocicoaster at Universal Orlando and experienced the Mosasaurus roll, but this literally feels like 2 of those consecutively. Now that I've had time to ponder on this demented attraction, I can safely say that it has my new favorite inversion I've experienced in my life. Number 11, Pink Typhoon Standing Coaster at Brazilian Park Wishusen Highland outside of Okayama. This, I think, was the most surprising roller coaster of the entire trip. I was blown away by the forces on this attraction. Now, despite its name, it isn't just a Togo stand-up coaster, it also runs a backward sit-down train, and they alternate operations throughout the day. We tried the latter first, and were extremely impressed by the sheer amount of airtime and the intensity in a few spots. Then came the stand-up experience, and the way this manufacturer has designed these vehicles, the restraints actually have some give to them, so the restraint moves up with your body whenever there's airtime, and down when there's especially forceful positives. The stand-up train definitely ran a fair bit rougher and was not the most comfortable experience, but that's my only gripe with what was otherwise an outstanding ride. Ultimately, I love the stand-up and backward sit-down trains about evenly, which I think says a lot about the former in particular. Pink Typhoon totally put me onto Togo stand-up coasters. I had no idea they could be this good. So good, in fact, that this is hands down my favorite stand-up I've ever ridden. Number 10, Bandit at Yomiuriland outside of Tokyo. Going in, I was skeptical about Bandit, seeing as it has such a great reputation, and the only other time I'd been on a large-scale Togo coaster was the aforementioned Big Apple coaster in Las Vegas. As previously stated, I don't hate that ride, I wouldn't even say I dislike the ride, yet I can acknowledge its flaws, and Bandit really didn't share any of those. Sure, its transitions from element to element can be a bit jarring, but I wouldn't remotely say that it's a rough ride in totality, so if anything, those spots are just kind of funny. That's how I describe them. But the reason I enjoyed Bandit so much is it has a remarkable sense of speed and a stupidly long layout. If you've been following the channel for a while, you're likely familiar with my taste in coasters by now. Sure, I love me some airtime and Bandit does have its moments, but first and foremost, speed's gotta be my favorite attribute about a coaster. This ride feels like a runaway train the way it tears through its course, and some of its quickest moments take place at the end of the ride since its terrain interaction is so flawless. It's kind of a work of art in many ways, and it's certainly one of Japan's most iconic coasters, so I've got nothing but love for Bandit. Number 9, Kawasemi at Tobu Zoo outside of Tokyo. The first roller coaster we rode on the 2025 Asia Tour, Kawasemi had the trip off to an excellent start. This wasn't my first rodeo with an Intamin Megalite coaster, which made its debut as Piraten at Djurs Summerland in Denmark. Having experienced that ride before, I knew exactly what to expect from the layout of Kawasemi, though I feel it's also worth mentioning I'd seen a lot of people talk down on how this coaster runs relative to its sister rides. But me and the entire group I was with couldn't disagree more. We thought this thing packed a punch through until the end. Along with Cedar Point's Maverick, the Intamin Megalite are the first coasters I'd point to if someone asked me, does a roller coaster need to be tall and fast to be one of the best? You simply would not want to judge these books by their cover, because on paper they seem like bona fide family coasters. But in actuality, they catapult you out of your seat time and time again, also causing you to gray out from its tight and intense turns. I also have to commend Kawasemi for how smooth it is. It kept me wanting to go right back in line and do it on repeat, which, of course, I did. Number 8, Big Boom at Nasu Highland Park outside of Nasu Shiobara. Other than the now-defunct Moonsault Scramble at Fuji-Q Highland, Big Boom is likely the most iconic coaster ever built by Meisho. It's garnished a following due to its unusual 75-degree drop that only shallows out at the last second, so in the back rows, it is one of the wildest, most obscene moments on any roller coaster. But it's not just the drop that makes Big Boom so good, it's also got a great camelback hill afterwards and a classic Meisho loop, as discussed earlier when talking about Loop the Loop at Risotsu Resort. Speaking of which, I feel like the same drugs that must have been used when they designed the last few inversions on their Ultra Twister were used by Meisho when designing this drop. They had to have been the two most messed up elements we had the privilege of trying while in Japan. But all around, Big Boom is a remarkably powerful coaster despite how short its layout is. I'm forever grateful I got to experience what is most definitely a top 5, maybe top 3 drop on any roller coaster in the world. Number 7, Takabisha at Fuji-Q Highland outside of Kofu. While not as crazy as the past few rides we talked about, the reason I have Takabisha this high on my list is because it's got such a complete layout. It is so much longer and more dynamic than some of these lower spots, kicking off with a ridiculously forceful launch into a blitz of inversions. Then it pauses halfway through and takes you up a vertical lift hill before hurling you into a 121-degree beyond vertical drop. Even though it is trimmed like crazy, the novelty of being able to say you've ridden the record holder for steepest coaster on Earth is epic. Well, technically TMNT Shellraiser at the American Dream Mall in New Jersey follows the same layout, with the one modification being that its drop angle was extended by half a degree. But those drops really don't feel any different, having ridden both myself. Speaking of which, having had experience with this layout prior to Takabisha, I knew what to expect, but for whatever reason, Shellraiser just runs kind of rough. Takabisha was never that way, however, and that allows for a more comfortable and enjoyable ride, for sure. Number 6, Pyrenees at Parque España in Shima. The signature attraction at an absolutely beautiful theme park resort, Pyrenees is a monster B&M invert with 6 inversions and some funky elements that you don't see often on this style of ride. I'd heard people describe it as a supersized Batman clone, which I feel is relevant to this list, seeing as we had a Batman clone take the number 18 spot. And I couldn't agree more with this sentiment. I think the first half of the layout on Pyrenees is as intense as one of those rides. And the Cobra Roll, man, that has to be one of the best Cobra Rolls ever built in the world. I'm also a big fan of how they crammed this tight helix into an already tight loop. Absolutely brilliant design in my opinion. But then the second half hits, and that is where the ride starts to die a bit. But because I don't often find myself praising second halves of B&M inverts, it isn't too much of a loss on Pyrenees. Therefore, I do consider this to be my favorite of the model at large, which I was so surprised by. Number 5, Fujiyama at Fuji-Q Highland outside of Kofu. Where do I even begin with this ride? Maybe I run through its stats? 259 feet tall, 80 miles per hour, 6,700 feet of track. All of that should be the recipe for one of the best roller coasters in Japan. But then you remember it's a Togo, and I know I've been proven wrong by them earlier on in the trip with Bandit and things like that, but Fujiyama is still a lot bigger. And I don't think there's any denying that it's kind of a janky mess. Like, some of these elements will make you feel like you're in a boxing ring. But the forces are so damn extreme that throwing in some of that Togo jank only really adds to the experience. Unlike Bandit and some other Togos on this list, Fujiyama only has lap bars, which means 2 things. First and most importantly is there's nothing to hit your head or neck against. That is a big win. But it also means the upper half of your body is going to be flopping around all over the place. That ending stretch consisting of 4 side-to-side bunny hills make up one of the wildest finales of any coaster in the world. It almost feels like it's trying to tear your body in half. And this isn't to mention Fujiyama's outstanding sense of speed, mainly in the second half when it starts to stray away from the norm with hypercoasters and stays low to the ground. I acknowledge that this isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, but riding Fujiyama was one of the most hilarious things I've ever done, which is why I had to rank it inside of my top 5. Number 4, Surf Coaster Leviathan at Sea Paradise in Yokohama. I'm sure many of you were convinced for a second that Fujiyama was my favorite Togo roller coaster, and while it came very close, Surf Coaster Leviathan shattered my expectations to oblivion. At first, it may not look like much, as its relatively small dips and relatively slow max speed make it appear as though it's a family coaster, but this is one of those rides you really got to experience in person to understand. The whole layout, especially the second half, throw you around like a rag doll. It's got everything ranging from ejector and floater airtime, positive G-force, laterals, all that I'm looking for in a coaster. Even better is said course was built 279 feet out into the ocean, so it's got one of the coolest locations conceivable. And finally, Surf Coaster Leviathan is like stupidly smooth. I don't know what they do to take care of this ride, or maybe Togo just hit a home run in the design process, but it is so comfortable, also because there's only lap bar restraints. So to me, Surf Coaster Leviathan is nearly a perfect ride, and yet it wasn't even able to crack the top 3, which I think speaks volumes as to how good these next few attractions are. Number 3, Flying Dinosaur at Universal Studios Japan in Osaka. Earlier we talked about Acrobat and all that makes a flying coaster so enjoyable, but none of them actually scare me like Flying Dinosaur does, because it feels like you spend half of the ride out on your back being crushed by positive forces, rather than in a prone position soaring through graceful elements. Nothing about this ride is graceful, not a single element. Flying Dinosaur's pacing is masterful. While virtually all flying coasters have a pretzel loop as its standout moment, I can't even pinpoint the best part of this one since it's actually got 2 pretzel loops. The first flips you into a roll and keeps rotating until you're on your back, and the second dives into a super tight tunnel, which is terrifying. Even the second half, which I hadn't heard nearly as much about, has some wild helixes and rolls that throw you around in a different way. I cannot believe this ride exists at a Universal park because this is supposed to be a family-friendly destination where anyone can experience all that it has to offer. Instead, I can only recommend Flying Dinosaur to the utmost die-hard thrill seekers who are looking for a coaster unlike any other on the planet. Number 2, Hakuge at Nagashima Spa Land outside of Nagoya. Rocky Mountain Construction has really made a name for themselves in the US, turning old rough wood coasters into smooth, innovative hybrid coasters. But 2019's Hakuge was their first time dabbling in the Asian market, which I'm happy to say turned out to be some of their best work yet. The whole first half of this layout is perfect, like I'm not sure it could be any better than it already is. The airtime moments are so powerful that many of the more conventional hills on this ride feel like triangles. But a lot like Pyrenees, I feel a bit indifferent about the second half relative to similar coasters. I mean, looking at it on its own, it's still great, but I don't think the inversions and turns have the same intensity as much of the prior elements. I'll tell you what though, the ride is stunningly gorgeous, easily one of the most beautiful coasters I've seen in my life. Having now been on every other RMC hybrid, I wouldn't exactly say Hakuge shook me to the core like a handful of others, but as a roller coaster in general, it's about as good as it gets, so that's why I've got it all the way up at number 2. Although, if I'm being honest, the gap between it and Ejinika at Fuji-Q Highland is greater than I would have expected. Ejinika is what I believe to be the most demented, batshit insane roller coaster ever built. After my first ride on the back edge seat, which is the craziest spot on the train to sit, I said that was undeniably the greatest coaster experience I've ever had, my new overall number 1. Then, as I tried it in other seats like the opposite, front inside, I didn't think it was quite as crazy, which is why I dropped it a spot in my rankings. But I can tell you for damn sure, it's at minimum the second best coaster I've ever ridden, and the best depending on the seat. It takes X2 at Six Flags Magic Mountain, an already insane coaster that I'd grown up with and always adored, and cranks up the intensity to 11. Ejinika also fixes all of the issues possessed by X2, like the excessive shakiness on some of the elements and a tiny little bit of dead space in the second half. Instead, this thing doesn't even give you a chance to breathe, like the last stretch of elements actually makes you feel like you've been compressed. Just thinking about this coaster makes me want to fly back to Japan so desperately, so I'm gonna go do that. Thank you so much for watching, like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel for more, and I will see you later. I've got to go catch my flight. Peace out, guys.